Vampire hunting, werewolf shunting, zombie confronting, paranormal nightmare. This brand new third-person mode for popular video game Resident Evil Village is truly an excellent... What? It's what? It's Resident Evil 4? Oh, fuck. Parasite infecting, damsel protecting, chainsaw deflecting, secret agent science fiction. Welcome to the channel, folks. I'm Rhythmicon, and this is Resident Evil 4 Remake, a review. All jokes to one side, Resident Evil 4 Remake really does feel like an iteration on and homage to 2021's Resident Evil Village. Interesting, considering Village itself was an iteration on and homage to the original Resident Evil 4. It's like these games are being developed by two opposing sides, locked in a tumultuous war to one-up one another, and quite frankly, if the outcome continues to be video games of this caliber, then keep it up, Capcom, shoot to kill. In this reimagining of 2005's action horror romp Resident Evil 4, the original title has been brushed over countless times with a fine-toothed comb, and while there are still a few nasty lice that have been missed, the many that were caught have been squashed, rebirthed, magnified, and expanded in all the right ways. This does leave me feeling somewhat conflicted. On one hand, I'm really pleased that 95% of the lice are gone, but it makes me wish all the more that the other 5% weren't still here, more irritating than ever before, sucking my blood and making me itch. Now, with apologies for that disgusting analogy, here's a quick disclaimer. If you want to check the platform, specs, difficulty, etc. that I played the game on, you can find all of that in the description. Gameplay shown here is mostly from the first few chapters and goes no further than the first half. I'd also like to point out that I'm going to do my best to avoid this review descending into an analysis of all the changes between original and remake. I'm endeavouring to judge this title on its own merits as much as possible, so let's get on with it. Most of my 17-hour playthrough was spent popping heads off an assortment of infected bad guys, and the moment-to-moment combat of Resident Evil 4 has received a pretty substantial facelift. Leon's new Secret Service chops apparently mean that he's become more adept than ever with his trusty combat knife, and before the action even kicks off, he can crouch down and shank enemies silently from behind. It's not always viable and seems to be generally only possible in situations and stages that the developers intended to be approached this way. Nevertheless, you're still handed the agency in those scenarios to decide whether your ammo is stacked enough to open fire or whether you want to take the quiet route instead. Said knife also allows Leon to parry select attacks, and timing this perfectly will bag you an opening for a melee follow-up. I know some people are bemoaning the fact that you can deflect chainsaws with a small combat knife. I think those people have perhaps forgotten what franchise they're dealing with here. I think this is pretty awesome, it's absolutely on brand, and I'm only sad Capcom haven't spoiled us with even more ridiculous block or parry animations. Some downed enemies will start to thrash around on the floor, indicating either that they're trying to do the worm or that they're about to get back on their feet and soak up more of your ammunition unless you use the knife to execute them. Using your knife or any of the disposable knives you can procure from the environment drains its durability, and you're either going to have to diligently search for new ones or fork out the cost of repair at the merchant. Was it annoying at times to hand over my hard-earned pesetas just to fix up my busted blade? Yes, absolutely, but the beauty here is the new depth that this system adds to combat. I enjoyed making those split-second decisions during a firefight about whether or not it was worth chipping away at my knife's durability. Perhaps I'd regret not holding on to it during whatever the game throws at me next, and it would be better to sink a few pistol rounds into my enemy instead. Most of the time, shooting Resi 4's Last Plagueis Infected feels exactly how you'd expect from a modern third-person shooter. Cycling through a varied arsenal of weapons, popping heads, legs, and blasting shit to shreds, it feels engaging and exciting. With the exception of some particularly egregious weapon sway that took me a bit of getting used to, I thought the moment-to-moment action in this game was incredibly fun, especially with the addition of new enemy types and some worthwhile new weaponry. As someone who played through the original game more than once, I enjoyed it a great deal. Except for when I didn't. This is where things get a bit muddier, so let's talk a bit about that. Where the combat really started to unravel for me was the boss encounters, most of which are exemplifications of where Capcom have missed, in my opinion, perfect opportunities to elevate Resident Evil 4 to not only one of the greatest remakes, but one of the greatest action games of all time. There are other late game stages that are demonstrative of similar issues, but since they appear so far into the game, I won't go into any detail on those here, except to say that sometimes encounters with large groups of enemies descend from the realm of nail-biting tension to screen-punching frustration. The infamous Del Lago, the game's first boss and one of the few examples of a stage that remains completely unaltered from the original, absolutely feels like it should have stayed in 2005. There's nothing inherently awful about it, but it really sticks out for me as a dull moment in the playthrough. This fight is, however, nowhere near winning the award for worst boss encounter, which could quite easily go to almost any one of the other bosses in the game. Arbitrary evade prompts that appear for some moves and not others, attacks that mostly can't be blocked or parried, and enormous multi-limbed and nimble foes in arenas barely big enough to drown one of these annoying demon dogs. Most of the boss encounters in Resi 4 feel like they come down to a question of whether or not you're carrying enough herbs to out-heal the damage you're taking as you race to unload your most powerful weapons into the boss's weak point. This has grown to a franchise-wide issue at this point, with all of the recent games featuring these outstandingly cool visual designs that are marred by the truly lackluster battles that follow. Most of the issues I had here could be solved by a simple real-time dodge, but Capcom really do not seem to like this idea. Not every action game needs an active dodge, I accept that, but if you are going to design enemies like this, large, powerful, and capable of lunging at you at speed, you really should think about whether or not the mechanics of your game can handle it in a way that's satisfying, because doing a light jog side to side while a hench mutant dude lobs flaming projectiles at you really did not feel all that satisfying to me. Not to mention the fact that it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to be able to backflip over a sweeping tentacle, but my only means of dodging a crazy chainsaw guy sprinting towards me is to amble lazily to the left. My issues with Resi 4's weaker combat elements do however pale in comparison to the ultimately exceptional quality of this product, but the moments of frustration were just deep enough and just often enough, especially towards the back end of the game, that I came away feeling more than a bit confused about my experience. After the credits rolled though, and I put some distance between myself and the game, I started to feel retroactively a lot more forgiving towards its flaws, but that certainly doesn't lessen how off-putting and disappointing those moments ended up being. Mr. Kennedy. There's far more to Resident Evil 4's genetic makeup than combat though, and it's through the support of all of these additional elements, some old and refreshed, some brand spanking new, that the game manages to climb to awe-inducing heights. The trusty merchant has of course returned, his services more valuable than ever. New ways to trade and upgrade, a new gem-socketing minigame, side quests to complete, and an evolved firing range rewarding charms for your attaché case that give a variety of passive enhancements. It's just a shop at the end of the day, but playing around with the best methods of maximizing profits and honing your arsenal is all part and parcel of the survivalist experience. The most pleasant surprise during my playthrough, much to my rapture and relief, was the newfound presence of puzzles dotted throughout the game. There were a couple back in 2005, sure, but they are both higher in number and in quality now, something the game sorely needed to bring it more in line with the rest of the series. I'm a big puzzle fan, and I was especially pleased each time I came across a new one in my playthrough. They're satisfying to solve, if not especially challenging, and so it should be. These puzzles are about providing the player with some extra variety and some welcome breathing room from all the tension and balls-to-the-wall action that the rest of the game offers. Resident Evil 4's pace maintains a transcendent rhythm from start to finish, and it's not the goal of any puzzle here to interrupt that flow. The overall level design, in fact, has been trimmed, tweaked, and shifted around to ensure that this tight pacing doesn't miss a single beat. I kept waiting to encounter certain sections from the original game so that I could roll my eyes and smugly claim, I remember why I hated this part, and they simply never came. With one or two relatively minor exceptions, the original game's dullest sections have either been revitalized or cut and replaced entirely with something of superior quality. No one section is tediously long or arduous. Clearly a great deal of labour and love has gone into perfecting this balance in the gameplay loop, and I was consistently impressed by how well this effort and attention to detail paid off. Attention has also been turned to revamping Resident Evil 4's story and the overall tone of the game. I consider the original title to be one of the series' sloppier entries in this sense. So sloppy in fact that I struggled to make much sense of the plot, the motivations of the villains, the overarching implications that the narrative had for the rest of the franchise. Safe to say, however, that slop has been mopped up and the recipe refined for this remake. Aside from Leon, our distractingly good-looking, taciturn protagonist, as dangerous and deadly as he is corny, the character you'll spend the most time with is Ashley Graham, captured daughter of the US president. She's a likeable person, charismatic, endearing, and honestly more believable as a human being now than she was in 2005. Her budding friendship with Leon is sweet, and by the time credits rolled, I actually found myself hoping that we somehow see her again in the future.
Leon, are you kidding me? Jumping across chandeliers, seriously, who does that?
What are you, my mother?
The voice acting is generally solid, with the possible exception of one fan favourite character who, whilst not what I would describe as bad, does fall a bit flat and I'm sure will come as a disappointment to some long-time fans.
You can stop right there, Leon.
Dialogue has heart where it counts, is cheesy in all the right places, and for all the right reasons. It always feels self-aware. The writers know what the fans are here for, and they deliver that at every turn. There are quite a lot of new documents dotted around, and reading through these provides a lot of additional context to the game's narrative, so much so that choosing to ignore them might see you having absolutely no idea who certain characters are or what their role is in the story. The extra narrative delivered by these files does a good job of grounding some of Resi 4's zanier plot beats and character quirks, and in particular I found the game's antagonists to be far more compelling this time around as a result. Does this game at all echo the storytelling prowess of something like The Last of Us? No, and it doesn't try to. If that's something you're looking for here, you will absolutely find only disappointment. Capcom knows what it is they're going for, they hit the mark 99% of the time, and it makes for a compelling action flick that's ultimately surreal and silly just as often as it is serious. That's kind of how I'd describe Resident Evil as a franchise at this point, and it's a big part of the reason why people adore it as much as they do.
Salutations, Mr. Kennedy.
Pivoting their priorities and making full use of the modern technology available to them though, one element that Capcom has made decidedly darker and more sinister is the overall tone of the game. Highly detailed environments, littered with ominous set dressing, dripping with mist, creaking and leaking atmosphere from every orifice.
Don't even think about trying this yourself.
Resident Evil 4 is absolutely stunning, both in terms of its surface level visual fidelity and the way it will make you pause for air as you soak up the unnerving undertones in every dilapidated hallway or grandiose castle corridor. I was certainly more awestruck and on edge than I ever was in 2005. Many people will be wondering though, as I was, is Resident Evil 4 Remake actually scary? The original game was a major leap away from the franchise's terrifying roots. Is it perhaps more like RE7 now? The answer to that, at least from where I'm standing, is a pretty resounding no. Did I yelp a few times at these genre-typical jump scares? Yes, absolutely. What makes a game truly scary for me though, is not the beast or being that jumps out at you, it's the way the game has you feeling in the moments leading up to it. Your mileage will vary, everyone has a different tolerance for scary shit, but that edge of your seat could snap at any given moment kind of tension simply isn't present here for me, but honestly, I didn't get to the end of the game and find myself wishing it was scarier. What the game lacks in fear factor, it makes up for in 101 other ways. Resident Evil 4 is up there despite some of the deep frustrations I experienced with the best video games ever made, of that I have no doubt. It is truly a superb action game that mostly nails its core mechanics as well as oozing oodles of personality, charm and intelligence. It's a strong contender too for the title of Greatest Remake, a category with no shortage of possible entries at this point. Not in any remake before or since Capcom's own Resident Evil 2 have I witnessed this level of veneration for the source material, this level of shrewdness when it comes to assessing what worked before and dialing it up to 11, and discarding those things that held the game back. And there are just the right amount of alterations and subversions to surprise and excite returning fans of the almost 2-decade-old original. Capcom has some seriously smart cookies under their umbrella, pun intended, and as far as I'm concerned, long may their reign continue. That's all from me today, folks. I'm Rhythmicon, and I think that Resident Evil 4 Remake is almost perfect. See you next time.